This is your 28storms.com tropical cyclone update for Tuesday, the 22nd of November. The quiet pattern continues across Australia, where no development is anticipated in the short term, and across much of the southern Pacific, the monsoon trough is showing no signs of any organization, and that is due to the persistent troughing that we see across much of the Coral Sea and the Solomon Islands. We see a different story in the Indian Ocean, where there are currently two features to keep an eye on. The first one is this tropical disturbance located toward the northeast of Madagascar. It has become a little bit better organized over the last 24 hours, and the U.S. Giant Typhoon Warning Center is now giving that system a low chance of becoming a tropical cyclone within the next 2 days. However, we do see that there is persistent troughing just to the southwest over Madagascar, so if the low begins to work its way a little bit closer to land, it is likely going to fall apart. And as it is now, the trough is likely to at least put a hamper on development, so we're not expecting anything to develop in a hurry down there in the southern hemisphere side of the Indian Ocean. But as we work our way closer to the Bay of Bengal, we are beginning to see a slight increase in convection, as has been anticipated for at least the past half week now, and there are growing indications that we will be dealing with at least an area of low pressure that we will have to closely monitor for tropical development as it inches closer to Sri Lanka and southern India. The latest low-level vorticity analysis shows a significant increase in low-level vorticity just to the west of Malaysia compared to just 24 hours ago, and this will be the focal point for at least the potential for tropical development over the next 5 days. And as we switch over to the wind shear analysis, we see that upper-level conditions are favorable across much of this region, and that is due to the fact that we have increasing upper-level ridging directly over this disturbed area of weather, as denoted here. This is the latest 0Z GFS forecast at the 500 millibar level, so we're looking at the middle part of the atmosphere, and this is the main steering layer. As of right now, we have a mid-level ridge located over western India. This ridge is forecast to continue sliding toward the east as this trough begins to amplify over much of Iraq and Iran. And notice as we go into 72 hours, we are beginning to see a 500 millibar vorticity spike, and that is in association with the developing tropical disturbance closer to the surface. And as we go into 96 hours, notice that this area of disturbed weather is forecast to begin moving a little bit more toward the northwest, and that is a result of this ridge continuing to slide east, and that trough is going to eventually turn the system straight into India, but not until that disturbed weather begins to move into the Arabian Sea. And I'll tell you what, this is a fairly favorable pattern, especially as we go into day 6. And this is the shear forecast for the same time. We see that there is favorable upper-level ridging aloft over much of the Indian subcontinent, extending westward into the eastern half of the Arabian Peninsula. And we do see that there is quite a lot of vertical wind shear just to the northwest in association with that approaching mid to upper-level trough, but it's currently at a safe enough distance to where this would not be inhibiting tropical development. In fact, it would only be enhancing the outflow from the poleward end of the storm, and that is going to result in more than likely a developing tropical cyclone as this begins to turn a little bit more toward Mumbai. And finally, the last thing I will show you with regard to the GFS forecast is what it's actually forecasting near the surface. And as we go into 48 hours, we see increasing shower and thunderstorm activity associated with a 1008 millibar surface low approaching Sri Lanka, and this is around the time when we can expect elevated rainfall to begin in this region. And then as we go into day 3 and day 4, this low is slowly advancing a little bit more toward the west-northwest, and it's beginning to move into the lower half of the Arabian Sea. And then as we go into day 6, that is when the storm is really forecast to begin organizing into what could quite easily be a tropical cyclone by this point. And then by day 6, it's beginning to turn a little bit more toward the north along the west coast of India. Meanwhile, this is the latest 24-hour ECMWF sea level pressure forecast starting at 24 hours out. We can see the broad 1006 hectopascal low located to the southeast of Sri Lanka, and we can also make out the second tropical disturbance located just to the northeast of Madagascar. And not a whole lot is forecast to change over the next 48, 72, and even 96 hours, so we're looking into day 4 now, and this low is beginning to spread westward into Sri Lanka and southern India, while our southern hemisphere low remains generally weak, and neither one of these systems are showing any signs of development. But as we go deeper into the medium range, much like the GFS was indicating, By the time the system moves into the eastern half of the Arabian Sea, that is when we could begin to see a little bit in the way of development. And sure enough, the ECMWF is starting to lower the surface pressures down to 1,004 hectopascals. So again, this will be the main area to watch, and the southern hemisphere system is really not forecast to develop by either one of the more accurate dynamical models at this time. As a bonus feature for today's video, I decided to include a map of all of the tropical cyclones in recorded history that have formed within 200 nautical miles of Sri Lanka during the months of November and December. And it's interesting to note that there are two main tracks that have occurred in history, and some of those are taking a more northerly track up the east coast of India, but as we saw with the latest forecasts from the EC, MWF, and GFS, several of these prior tropical cyclones have made that west-northwest track with an eventual turn more toward the northeast into the west coast of India. So this would not really be a very rare tropical cyclone track if the forecast from the models were to verify. So it is continuing to look like we will at the very least have an area of disturbed weather develop near the southern tip of India, providing that region with well above average rainfall percentages or probabilities, and there will be an increased or elevated risk of tropical cyclone formation, especially within the next 3 to 6 days. So interest in Sri Lanka and much of the coastal portions of India should just keep an eye on the tropics, but elsewhere things are looking fairly quiet. So thanks again for viewing the latest 28storms.com Cyclone Outlook. Don't forget to check out 28storms.com/cyclone for more information.